Nothing about that autumn day seemed out of the ordinary. The road stretched out peacefully, the trees showing their russet leaves, and the faint sound of cartoons on the tablet kept the three children quiet in the back seat. She drove attentively, as she always did, while her husband checked his cell phone in the passenger seat. The family was headed to Canada for a family reunion her parents had organized. It was one of those long trips, with thermoses of coffee in the cup holder, backpacks, filled with snacks, and that sense of routine that seemed secure. But normalcy didn't last long. Without warning, he slowly put his cell phone away, turned to her with a pale face and wide eyes, and said in a low but firm voice that they had to turn around. Now. No explanations. The strange thing wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. He wasn't angry or upset, but there was an urgency in his voice that brooked no discussion. She hesitated for a second, but she knew him too well. She knew. He wasn't someone given to impulse, and something in his gaze made her stomach clench. She didn't ask anything. He turned the wheel, took the nearest exit, and headed back down the same highway they'd come on. Neither of them said a single word in those first few minutes. The silence was thick. And in that silence, she already sensed that something serious had been about to happen. When they finally exited the highway, they pulled into a rest area. He got out of the car first, walked around the vehicle, and opened the trunk without a word. She followed, confused and heart racing. Then he pointed to a red backpack right next to the children's luggage. "Your parents asked us to take it, remember?" he said with a mixture of guilt and desperation. She nodded, still not understanding. It had been one of those last-minute requests. "Just a small backpack, with a few things for my aunt who lives over there." Nothing seemed out of place, until he opened the backpack and showed what was inside. Between baby clothes and blankets, there were several packages wrapped with duct tape, all the same size, with that dense look that left no room for doubt. She didn't need anyone to explain it to her. Her body immediately shook. She swallowed, brought a hand to her mouth, and felt her entire nervous system shut down and turn on at the same time. The first thing she thought about wasn't her parents, it was her children. They were meters away, sleeping in the car, unaware that they had traveled with that thing in the trunk. Unaware that, had they crossed the border, their lives could have changed forever. She, who had always been the balanced one, the responsible one, the one everyone called when something needed solving, had been on the verge of being used as a mule by her own family. For a few seconds, she stood motionless, staring at the packages as if she were still trying to convince herself it wasn't real. But it was. And the realization hit her with a brutal weight. It wasn't just the shock of what almost happened. It was the avalanche of memories, all the years she'd been cast in that unconditional support role. Since she was a teenager, she'd been the one who had settled the conflicts at home, the one who mediated arguments, the one who did everything to maintain an image of a good daughter. She'd grown up believing that the family's stability depended on her silence, her patience, her ability to endure without complaining. And now, seeing that backpack, she understood how far they were willing to push her. He slammed the trunk shut and said this couldn't go on. They were going to come back immediately, return the backpack, and be done with it all. She nodded, still in shock, but with her mind racing. The drive back seemed longer, more tense. Neither of them said much. The children woke up at some point and asked for water, and she answered with a shaky voice, trying to sound normal. But inside, it was as if she'd been hit in the stomach that wouldn't stop hurting. She tried to make sense of it. Why didn't anyone warn her? Why did they put the grandchildren at risk? Why her? But deep down, she already knew the answer. It had always been her, the functional daughter, the one who puts up with it all, the one who didn't ask questions. When they arrived back at her parents' house, the atmosphere was so familiar it hurt. The facade with its neatly aligned flower pots, the smell of coffee always ready in the kitchen, and that heavy silence that seemed to hide secrets. She got out of the car, took a deep breath, and carried her red backpack with trembling hands. No one asked anything. Her mother came out to greet them with an automatic smile, one of those she knew so well, the kind they used to mask chaos. Without saying a word, she went into the house, left her backpack by the stairs, and went back out. Not one explanation, not one confrontation. She no longer had the strength to argue. She just wanted to leave. On the way back, she hardly spoke. Neither did he. Only when they got home, with the children asleep and the comforting silence of the hearth enveloping them, did he ask her if she was okay, and she said no. For the first time in a long time, she admitted out loud that she wasn't okay. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the bathroom floor with the light off, trying to sort everything out in her head. The pieces fell into place in a frightening way. There had always been signs, small. Omissions, awkward silences, strange requests disguised as innocent favors. But she, with her need to be helpful, not to disappoint, had never wanted to see. The next day, she woke up with a decision made. She wasn't going to confront anyone. She wasn't going to make a fuss or seek explanations. She knew she wasn't going to get them. Instead, she silently began to move the pieces, as she had always done, but this time on her own. She talked to her husband, told him what she'd been feeling for years, what she discovered that night in the bathroom, how broken she felt inside. He listened silently, without interrupting, with a mixture of sadness and suppressed anger. He proposed something she hadn't expected: to move, to change her state, her surroundings, her history, to start over, far from everything that had hurt her. And for the first time in a long time, she said yes without feeling guilty. That same week, the preparations began. They looked for a house in North Carolina, near his parents, who had always treated them with respect and affection. She quit her job and began organizing the move as if it were a rescue operation. Every box she packed, everything she left behind, was a way of regaining control over her life. They didn't tell anyone. There were no goodbyes or explanations, just silence. A silence that was no longer synonymous with submission, but with protection. For her, for her children, for the family she was building honestly, from the ground up. The move happened on a Saturday morning. The children thought it was an adventure, like when they played camping in the living room. She smiled at them, but inside she felt a strange vertigo, as if she were jumping into the void. They left the keys inside the old house, closed the door without looking back, and began the journey. For the first few hours, she spoke almost nothing. She stared out the window, mentally reviewing every time she ignored her own discomfort so as not to inconvenience others. Every time she put her family's needs above her own. Every time she said yes, wanting to shout no. Now, finally, she was choosing her own peace. The first few days in North Carolina were a painful respite. The neighborhood was quiet, the house was modest but welcoming, and her in-laws greeted them with heartfelt hugs and plates full of home-cooked food. For the first time in years, there was no drama, no demands disguised as affection, no emotional blackmail, just calm. She spent hours watching the children play in the yard without fear, without tension. Her husband came home early from work, and the nights were simple. Not perfect, but authentic. It took time to let her guard down. Sometimes she woke up with a start, afraid everything would fall apart. But with each passing day, she felt a little freer. Over time, attempts to contact her began to arrive. Calls from unknown numbers, unanswered messages, emails with subjects like, "We just want to talk," or "Don't ignore us," like, that. She ignored them all. She knew that if she answered even one, the rift would reopen. But the breaking point came somewhere else. One day, as she was leaving work, the kindergarten director asked her to come into the office. Their parents had shown up unexpectedly to look for the grandchildren, without authorization, and with an attitude as friendly as it was insistent. They carried gifts, candy, and said things like, "We're the grandparents. It's okay." It was the first time she felt real fear, not for herself, but for her children. After that incident, they took more serious measures. They changed the children's schools, blocked the entire family from social media, and placed the grandparents on a contact restriction list. The principal of the new school was understanding and cooperative from the start. It wasn't easy. There were times when she felt cruel. Times when the children asked why they didn't see their grandparents more, and she had to take a deep breath and give. Gentle answers, without lying, but without hurting. But she knew she was doing it for them. Because she understood that true love isn't that which chains with guilt, but that which protects with firmness. A few months later, when everything was starting to stabilize, she received an unexpected email from her sister. It had no subject line, just a single line in the body. Mom and Dad were arrested. For a second, she thought it was a joke. But when she opened the attachment, she saw a local news report. A middle-aged couple had been arrested trying to cross the border with drugs hidden in their vehicle. It was them. This time, they didn't use anyone else. This time, they did it on their own. The report said they were sentenced to 4 years in prison. She read it all, her stomach churning, silent without moving from the spot. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't feel immediate relief or an explosion of rage. What she felt was a strange calm, almost as if something had finally ended. She sat in front of the computer, remembering the red backpack, the smell of the car seats, the weight of fear at that roadside stop. She didn't share the news with the children, or with anyone outside of her husband. She didn't need to. She no longer had to justify herself, or protect anyone, or carry guilt that wasn't hers. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to be strong for others. She just needed to breathe. And she did. As the days passed, there was no attempt to reach out. Not from her sister, not from anyone else. The silence, which had previously been a source of anxiety, now felt like a refuge. She resumed her routine with the children, focused on work and rebuilding her emotional well-being. She discovered immense pleasure in everyday life, preparing breakfast without surprises, going to the park without fear, reading bedtime stories without a shadow of tension. She didn't need major external changes to feel good. She just needed to know that she was making decisions from a place of her own, not from guilt or duty. Sometimes, while folding clothes or preparing dinner, her mind wandered back in time. She remembered the small signs she'd ignored for years, the passive-aggressive comments, the demands disguised as concern, the blatant favoritism toward her sister. She remembered how she'd been indoctrinated to prioritize image, to never say no, to avoid inconveniencing others. And she understood that this pattern had been more dangerous than any border or loaded backpack. She'd lived in an emotional prison for years, and no one outside noticed, because the cell was decorated with smiles, family birthdays, and well-framed photos. Now, finally, she lived free. The biggest change wasn't external, it was internal. She stopped apologizing for everything. She stopped justifying herself when she decided not to attend a family video call or not respond to an ambiguous message. She learned to stick with what was clear, what was safe, what didn't hurt. Even her body posture changed. She walked more upright, spoke more slowly, allowed herself to say, "I don't want to," without feeling like she had to explain herself. Her husband noticed the difference, and although he was also healing in his own way, they learned to truly listen to each other, without the interference of a family system that had tried to turn them into chess pieces. One day, while walking with the children along a path in the woods near their home, one of them asked if they could visit the grandparents during the upcoming holidays. She didn't break down. She crouched down, looked him in the eye, and told him it wouldn't be possible for now, but that someday they could talk more about it. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either. It was a way of protecting her children's innocence without burdening them with a history they weren't yet ready to understand. That was the hardest part, learning how to care without repeating the mistakes that had hurt her so much. But she was getting there, step by step. What surprised her most was how her body also began to heal when her mind felt safe. The constant migraines disappeared. She no longer woke up in the middle of the night with her heart racing. She began to sleep soundly for the first time in years. Even her appetite returned naturally, without anxiety or guilt. Simple things like listening to music while cooking or sipping coffee in silence on the terrace became rituals of peace. She didn't need grand declarations to know she'd made the right choice. It was enough to feel her own rhythm, without the constant pressure of having to keep up with everyone else. Sometimes she read stories on anonymous forums, accounts of people who had also had to cut ties with their own families to survive emotionally. She felt less alone reading them. There was a kind of silent consolation in knowing she wasn't the only one who had said enough when everyone expected her to remain silent. One day, after much thought, she decided to write her own story as well. Not out of revenge, not to seek approval, but because she understood that silence, although sometimes necessary, shouldn't last forever, and because maybe, on the other side of the screen, someone needed to read that it is possible to leave, that it isn't easy, that it hurts, but it is possible. She never imagined that a single day, a single decision in the middle of the road, would mark such a profound before and after. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she hadn't turned around, if she had kept going, crossing the border with that red backpack in the trunk and her 3 children asleep in the back. She preferred not to imagine it, because in that turnaround, she not only saved her present, she also broke a pattern that had haunted her entire life. She escaped a sentence that wasn't hers to bear. She chose herself. And although there were dark days, and although the wound still stings from time to time, she could now say it was worth it. Today, from a quieter life, without noise or masks, without blackmail or chains disguised as affection, she allows herself to look back without hatred. She no longer seeks to understand why her parents crossed certain lines. She doesn't wish them ill. She only hopes that one day they'll understand the harm they caused, or not. Because the truth is, she no longer needs answers. The only thing left lingering in her mind is a question that sometimes still pops into her mind in the middle of the night when everything is quiet. Did I go too far, or not far enough?